Hello, welcome to the West Tigers podcast. We are up to episode number 68. Eddie Otto, how are you? Good to see football is not too far away again.
Yeah, g'day, Joel. Good, thanks. It feels real now. I don't know about you, but just with the first pieces of the draw coming out this afternoon, and I think there's only after this weekend one more weekend football free, all going well. So definitely something for everyone to look forward to.
Well, we've drawn the Sharks in that first, it's actually round 3 game, 5:30. No venue set. I suppose the venue doesn't really matter too much, Eddie, because nobody's going to be there. Really, it is the crowd that makes the difference, isn't it? Not the venue.
Yeah, you'd think so, Joel. Really. I mean, it might be a difference when, for instance, we have to travel in round 4. We go to the Titans. Not sure if they'll be playing on their home ground or Suncorp, but it did say that game would be in Queensland. But, yeah, taking on the Sharks, I don't think it matters if it's at Cogra, if it's at Leichhardt, if it's Campbelltown, if it's at ANZ. Do you know where it is? No one knows where it is at the moment.
Well, it's scheduled as the Sharks come up as the home team, so I presume it's technically quite a Sharks home game. So maybe the chances are it'll be at Cogra, but at this stage it's not yet determined. I don't believe. But one thing that looks to be determined for that game is it looks like Adam Doueihi is going to be fullback. Michael Maguire said in that recent interview that he did that's where he was leaning towards. I think a lot of people, probably you and I both, thought that was probably a good move. No disrespect to Corey Thompson, but I think Corey's best place is on the wing.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think Adam Doueihi was bought with the playing fullback in mind. It was only the fact that he joined us in might have been early February or late January, the fact that Tomo started those first 2 games. But I think there's probably more upside there in Adam Doueihi. I don't think he's by far the finished article. It might be a bit of a, not trial and error, but a bit hairy those first couple of weeks with him at the back, just seeing how he handles those new combinations and that extra workload. But I think it's the right move long term.
The interesting thing is that we are in this unusual season where there are no lower grade games. So if you're a Robert Jennings and you lose your spot to Corey Thompson, which we presume might be what happens, how does Robert Jennings fight his way back in other than training hard? And that's going to be obviously an influence on the Josh Reynolds situation, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Is that if you're not playing first grade, you're off the scene, aren't you?
Yeah, I didn't really think about that, but that's a massive thing. We've seen guys in the past go back. I think Elijah Taylor last year sort of fought his way back in through playing well in the State Cup, and maybe that's going to be a big, I'm sure we're going to talk about Josh Reynolds in a minute, a big tipping point, the fact that there's no, like you said, barring injuries or ill discipline or suspension, there's no real way of forcing your way back in unless players are playing really badly, getting dropped. So, yeah, that's a good thing. I suppose you're just going to be having to impress Michael Maguire on the training field week in, week out. Yeah,
well, the changes would theoretically see Moses Mbye playing in the centres, which, I think is a pretty good backline. And naturally there's Harry Grant that's in and around there. Again, just before we get to Josh Reynolds, if you do go Harry Grant at hooker, you'd have to say that maybe there's a possibility that Billy Walters would grab that bench spot, or Josh Reynolds, if Josh Reynolds is still here. So really, at this point, Josh Reynolds is only probably a 50-50 to even make first grade, you would think, at this stage for that game, if he is still a West Tiger.
Yeah, well, I'd say, reading between the lines, Joel, less than 50-50. I think Harry Grant, without doubt, is going to be our starting number 9. I think Michael Maguire rates him extremely highly. I've heard some, even the past week, you've heard some things that, a coach like Maguire doesn't like to give away too much, but he almost compared him to a young Cameron Smith in the way he can read a game and do the little things that a number 9 is so, unique to their position. So I think he values specialists, and I think if he does that, I think he'll probably lean towards Billy Walters, who's probably played more 9 than Josh Reynolds on the bench.
Yeah. Well, you'd probably say that. And realistically, although Josh had some good moments against the Knights, I thought Billy Walters has been consistent sort of through the pre-season. and has played pretty decently and can cover maybe potentially more spots than Josh Reynolds. But let's quickly talk about Josh Reynolds. It seems to be that a decision on whether he will be going back to the Bulldogs is imminent. The last thing that I read just through on the Daily Telegraph this afternoon is that the decision will be made this weekend. So maybe this time next week it'll all be a moot point.
Yeah, well, again, I listened to Michael Maguire's sort of online press conference last night, and I think Josh Reynolds probably is trying to instigate a move back. I think West Tigers are happy for him to move back, and I think the sticking point will be how much Canterbury are willing to tip in. Because let's be honest, Joel, if we can get this contract off our books, it's nothing personal against Josh or anything like that, but if we can dump half this contract or even a little bit less, if it's 700 grand, if you can get 300 or 400 grand off that for the next 2 years, why wouldn't you take that opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I think for the reason that we were talking about before is that I don't think he's a given for first grade at the West Tigers. If he does go back to the Bulldogs, and that if you're not playing first grade, you're not playing. You go back to the Bulldogs, you're going to be going back there to play first grade. And if we can get some of that contract off our books, no disrespect to Josh, but it's if right now if we hadn't signed Josh Reynolds and Josh Reynolds was available right now for $700,000 a year to come and play off the bench, you would say no way. So if you look at it that way, absolutely. If we can get this contract, no disrespect to Josh, but if we can get him off our books, it is a fantastic outcome for West Tigers, so long as we free up enough cash, because obviously we'll have to replace him in the 30, and that it's a good deal. I was hoping, and I heard a few people talking about it on the forum, West Tigers forum, and externally talking about Nick Meaney, who I think would be a good addition to West Tigers. He can kick goals, can play fullback, and could be a good long-term option. So, but I haven't heard any that sort of story eventuate and grow. But a trade wouldn't be bad because it would give us our 30th player too.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, Joel, but it might have been before we started the podcast, but I sort of had inside word might have been nearly 2 years ago that Nick Meaney was all signed and sealed under Ivan Cleary. And it was only then when the Bulldogs had to clear a stack of cap space that they offered up Moses Mbye, and that sent Mbye to us and Meaney to the Bulldogs, which I was disappointed about, even though Mbye played a heap of first grade, because I had big raps on Nick Meaney. I think, like you said, he's got a stack of speed. He's still a bit raw, but he's a goal kicker. I would jump at the chance to take him for Josh Reynolds, which would probably mean, like even more upside for us. I just think he's a potential long-term fullback, potentially better than Adam Doueihi for mine as a fullback, and he's a winger with some speed, and he'll put on a bit more size. And I think with him, Dallin Watene-Zelezniak probably having a mortgage on the fullback spot there, that'd be really, really interesting for me if we could get him, because and back to the Bulldogs, Joel. What is it besides? I shouldn't be probably saying this, don't want to give the Bulldogs any ideas, but what is it besides sentiment? The fact they want Josh Reynolds back. They've already got Kieran Foran, who's barely played for 3 years. Josh Reynolds is the same. They've got Lachlan Lewis, who's a good young 5'8". I think they might have debuted another young halfback this year. Yeah. And I even had a scroll through the kennel, the Bulldogs forum, which I don't recommend for anyone who's not a Bulldogs fan. And they, who are, Josh Reynolds fanatics, Bulldogs fans, they're about 80% against the idea. So who's running the Bulldogs? Hopefully someone that's got no idea.
It's not our problem if they're willing to do it. I can't see aside from sentimentality, I can't see the strategy behind it. And I guess, like so many of these situations that we've been through and talked about, it's just words in the newspaper really at this stage, although you can kind of read and cut through, as you're alluding to and talking about what Michael Maguire said. He didn't shut it down, and then normally that means something is going on. So look, it's like anything. Until it's signed and sealed, you just don't know what's going on and whether it will happen or not. As I say, I think it would be good for Josh. I think it would be good for West Tigers, and probably in a way, even though there may not be we can't quite work our way around the the reason why the Bulldogs would do it. I think it would be good for them to at least have one of their favourite sons back. And I mean, they obviously want to try and put back together that sort of dogs of war attitude and mentality. They've got a long way from it, but is Josh Reynolds the man to do it? It's not our problem. I don't know.
No, I can't get past anything other than sentiment, wanting them to, Dean Pay, he's on a very short leash, to use a bit of a pun there at the Bulldogs. So I don't know. Let's see what happens. But I'd be saying thank you very much if they want to give us Nick Meaney and Josh Reynolds the other way.
Yeah, that'd be a lovely deal. Russell Packer, we hadn't heard anything about Russell Packer for 12 months, other than he had a bad toe. And now all of a sudden, the reports out of West Tigers is he's ripping in and raring to go. I think he is. I mean, Harry Grant is definitely something that we needed as well. But I think Russell Packer is, if we can get him fit and firing, I think we'll make the 8.
Yeah, well, it'll almost be like a new signing. We remember the start of 2018. Jolie was fantastic that first month of the season, hampered by a toe injury for long parts of 2018, and then last year barely sighted. There wasn't a lot of word around the camp last year, which was disappointing for the fans because we weren't sure if he was injured or whether he was off with Maguire, but maybe it was just an injury that they struggled to get to the bottom of. And I've seen this week that there's been a couple of articles on the official site that Russell Packer's back. He's starting to do the majority of the training, and by all accounts, he's raring to go, which would definitely, a fully fit and motivated Russell Packer at his best would definitely fit in either in the starting front row or a bench front row spot.
Yeah. He take a bit of pressure off the younger players like McHaley, and I think, as we've said before, I think that we are lacking that one more prop and that impact prop. Fingers crossed. There they are. The fingers are crossed that Russell makes a contribution this year. And if we do move on Josh Reynolds and Russell is back and he's carrying his weight, then those deals are almost done, because Chris McQueen runs out at the end of the year, which, to give Ivan Cleary credit, it wasn't Ivan Cleary that signed him. But, that deal is almost done. And if you look at the guys that are off contract at the end of this year, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for 2021 West Tigers to strengthen the roster and spend some money on it.
Well, it's very exciting. I think you're going to talk about in a minute another guy who's just come on board.
Yeah, Shawn Blore from the Panthers, who has had big raps coming off an injury, which that's happened a few times with signings that we've made over the years. But got good pedigree and played for New South Wales under-18s, etc. And by all accounts, quite good leadership qualities as well. It's definitely a Madge type signing. And if you add Utica Manu next year, the forward pack's starting to come together nicely.
Yeah, very nicely. You can see it's you've spoken about specifically in the past his power style of game and how he likes to build his own sides, and he's doing it the same way. And he realised probably when he got here that he didn't quite have the personnel to play the style of football that he wants. And I usually like to try and do a bit of homework on players before we speak about them. I actually haven't seen much, if any, of Shawn. I saw someone put up a clip of I think it might have been 20s Origin and a couple of highlights packages, but most of the guys on the forum that were having their say sounds like he's got a lot of potential. I think he was picked to train like with the main State of Origin squad as an emerging player, and obviously from that Penrith nursery, you're better off, cherry picking guys from Penrith and from a Roosters or something like that, like we've seen with Momorowski, than some other clubs.
Yeah, do you think this spells the end for guys like Elijah Taylor and Chris Lawrence?
Well, without sounding too harsh, you'd like to think so. You'd like to think that this roster's going to start to turn over, and that's nothing against those guys. They're both extremely wholehearted players that will put their body on their lines every week. But I think we know that to get to the next level, we need players that are going to have a little bit more, a bit more youth, a bit more size, a bit more dynamic sort of play. But they those guys, even Utica Manu, the Parramatta guy, they're going to have to learn the ropes. I mean, first grade's a big step up from under 20s, even if you've got all the raps in the world. So whilst it's exciting, we can't just expect them to sort of be all starting in first grade in round 1 next year. I'm sure there'll be some sort of phase in, phase out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got to do it as a transition. But by having some salary cap space and not being locked into big salaries that chew up all of your cap. If you use your cap smart, you can transition guys in and out, like Melbourne does with their forward pack. That they never seem too weighed down. They've got a couple of guys that are the centerpieces of that forward pack, and then they just rotate the other guys in and around them, and it works nicely.
Yeah, and having that depth, I mean, I sort of thought at the start of this season, even the forward pack was starting to take shape, given guys like Alawai and McKaylee coming on to the scene and getting Zane Musgrove back. So you add a couple more guys next year, then you really start to get real competition for places, which is what you want in any successful side.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably the main thrust of the news that's been around for West Tigers. But one other thing that has been happening is that the club sent out a survey to all the members. Did you get yours, Eddie? And have you done it?
I haven't, Joel. I haven't checked my emails the last couple of days. When did it arrive for you?
Yeah, I got it maybe on Tuesday. Yeah.
I might have said, oh, you'll have to ask me next time, but I'm sure I've got it because I've definitely paid my membership for this year, Joel.
Okay, so check your spam. Could be in the spam.
What was the basis of it?
I think it was good. It was a good opportunity for West Tigers fans to be able to tell the club what they're thinking, and it appeared to me like the questions weren't loaded. Like sometimes if you look at old questionnaires and things like that, the question would be, would you rather play at ANZ Stadium or Bank West? And the fans might go, well, I don't want to play at either of those games, but you've got no option but to answer those two questions. It wasn't that sort of questionnaire. It was, which home ground would you like to play at? And you could just put in Leichhardt or ANZ or Bank West, So you had all the autonomy about what you wanted to say back to the club, which was fantastic. So it's probably the club is probably going to get plenty of good, honest answers. And I hope they really look at the answers really closely and look at how the fans are feeling and look at the frustrations that we have. I was honest. I said, we've got to have one home ground. We've got to work towards that. As a fan, I find 4 different home grounds way too distracting. It's actually counterproductive for me because if it was just, you never get into your routine. I love the routine of going to the game. But when you're here and you're there and all that sort of stuff. So I said all of that in my survey. And by the sound of it, what I've been reading on the forum and what people have been posting on our Facebook West Tigers podcast page, people have been giving plenty of good feedback, which I think can only be a good thing.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely fill that out. Was that the most pressing sort of question there? Were there any others around recruitment or anything like that, or was it mainly to do with home ground?
Yeah, there was the opportunity to have you say on football matters and things like that. So, yeah, take your time. It's probably take you about 15, 20 minutes, but well worth doing. And I hope all West Tigers members do go in and have their say because it's one of the opportunities, yeah.
I was just going to say before, I think we're going to talk about 5/8, but I just, speaking about, listening to the fans and whatnot, it looks like the NRL, Peter V'landys, I don't know how much power this guy's got, but he's gone back to one referee job. I can't believe it that they've done this 2 weeks before the start of a restarted season. I'm not saying I hate the idea of one referee, but to go into one referee and this new 6 again rule, I think it could be absolute chaos for the first couple of weeks. What do you think?
He's brave. I'll give him that. I mean, normally when you come into a job, you might just sit there for a few months and just watch and wait and see. But I think he's going to take it by the scruff of the neck. So I'll give him that. Maybe it's going to be a return back to areas of the game and things about the game that we liked more than what has developed in the last couple of years, which, it is a fresh set of eyes on the game. So maybe that is a good thing. I think that you only need one referee. I don't think the 2 referees has been a great success. The big question for us is, will it change the ruck speed? Will it affect, and it's going to affect the way that teams play? And I wonder if that's going to be an advantage to us. Potentially.
Yeah, well, that's the $1 million question, I think, is what will the game look like? I think both sides. I saw Ricky Stewart today actually came out in defence of V'landys and says, look, we can't have coaches all the time being the influencers on decisions in the game because they've got self-interest at hand. Of course you would. If you're the Roosters of Melbourne, you're the best at wrestling, you want referees and whatnot. So I think, like you said, it's a brave move by Peter V'landys, but whether one referee in today's age will make the game quicker, I'm not 100% convinced. I know they still have it in international rugby league. I know that pocket referee really doesn't do a whole lot besides saying move and whatever, but I just think, I think it's a giant risk to take. I'm not against it. Like I said, I wasn't a huge fan of two referees. I was just stunned that they would pull this move 2 weeks before the start of a restarted competition.
You mentioned the term quicker. A quicker game does not make for a better game. A high-scoring game does not make for a better game. Look at Super League.
Well, that was, I think, Laurie Daly sort of mentioned that. That's one thing he was, I think, concerned about with this 6 again rules. He said you may find that all of a sudden teams are getting blown out because they're just defending 15 or 20 plays in a row. But on the flip side of that, Joel, Wayne Bennett said fans are generally sick of games with 20 and 25 penalties being blown and constant stoppages. So if you can find a way for 6 or 8 of those penalties to essentially happen without the game stopping, it would be great. But I'll give you the example. What happens if there's 10 minutes to go, we're down 18-16 and, the Sharks make an infringement in the ruck and you're 30 metres out straight in front and the ref waves 6 again. Can we go, oh, hang on a second, we want the 2 points? Like that really hasn't been explained, has it?
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. And again, the thing that I come back to is I don't think the game was broken. I'm not saying in recent times. What I'm saying is going back 10 or 15 years, I don't think the game was broken. And they went and they constantly manipulated and changed and tried to do this. Let's make it faster. Let's make it this. And it hasn't improved it. It's just made it less attractive. I think that, as I've said before, the less they do, the better. The less of these crazy, silly rules. If it's a penalty, just make it a penalty.
I think with the one referee, like I said, I agree with you. It wasn't broken, but Joel, 15 years ago with one referee, there was far less scrutiny on decisions. And I'd like to see the game return to that. I don't know if that's possible, but I just worry now with one ref. If they go up to the bunker 10 times and they slow motion knock-ons and things, of course you're going to find mistakes. But back in I think we termed the glory days of rugby league in late 90s and whatnot, you just got on with it. You'd show the replay one. You didn't know if it was a try or not, and you just moved on with the game. And I'm wondering if we can actually go back further next year and say, right, no bunker. Maybe you got a couple of captain's challenges to go upstairs, and let's get on and play rugby league and cop the fact that in general, if you're a good enough team, you'll make the 8, and it'll be swings and roundabouts throughout the year. Yeah,
exactly. Well, let's look at it from another perspective. And before we move on, I really want to talk about West Tigers 5/8. But okay, so 1989. I'll just use these as perfect example, right? 1989, Bruce Maguire is penalised when it should have been a Belmore penalty, right? So that probably cost us the premiership and cost a whole lot of guys the premiership. That was their last opportunity. Fast forward to last year's grand final, you've got 2 referees, you've got video referee, you've got this, you've got that, and they still stuffed it up. Yeah. So what's the advantage? Because the more people that you've got to make decisions, the greater the chance is that you're going to make mistakes. It doesn't eradicate the mistakes, I don't believe.
Yeah. I think the sooner people and shows like NRL 360, I think they've got a responsibility that rugby league is an imperfect game.
Yeah, it is.
It's a game that has to be managed rather than, the worst thing that's happened, I think, is the referees coaching and going in having to tick boxes rather than just Bill Harrigan. When he refereed, he wasn't my favourite. I'm sure he's not your favourite person, Joel. Yeah. But when he started refereed, he was out there, he said, just to manage the game. To use common sense and let the players play, whereas now it seems like you've got to go and appease your master and tick boxes. And I think the game's lost the plot over the past 10 years with all that.
Yeah, I agree. Agree completely. Let's see what they come up with. I'm going to share screens and then you will be able to see all of the... Well, it's actually not all because there's not that many guys that have really played 5/8 for West Tigers over a long period of time. Eddie, can you see the screen?
I can see you, Joel. It's not coming up for me to 5'8", but that doesn't matter. You can just swing and by me.
Okay. Well, we started off with Kevin McGuinness. We've spoken about
I am
Kevin.
glowing in the dark here, though, so I don't know if that's because I'm in the dark. I can't see, but it's not on my screen.
The West Tigers podcast lighting department needs to get back together. Kevin McGuinness. Michael Gillette played a few games. Michael, of course, made a bigger contribution over 6 or 7 years with Balmain, but I thought he was a good player on his day, Michael Gillette. The only thing with Michael Gillette is he had an uncanny ability to kick the ball straight down the throat of the fullback every time.
I do remember that now you bring that up. He had a big boot on him, but it was often, like you said, straight down the throat. He was, he had a pet play, Michael Gillette. I remember Phil Gould used to say he had a pet play where he sort of almost showed and go and went himself. And I remember one game at Parramatta Stadium in 2000, him and Tyron Smith, they had a blinder. And it was a bit few and far between. I think he had potential to be better, Michael Gillette, but he was a good ball player in his day.
Daniel Fitzhenry played, during the obviously the Tim Sheens era, played a few games at 5'8", and most people on the West Tigers forum would still reminisce about what they call the Daniel Fitzhenry donuts, because he'd get the ball and run around in circles.
Yeah, he was. I think he was a better winger than a 5'8". He had a nice little short kicking game, but yeah, he was pretty indecisive, and I don't think specialist sort of position. But Sheens was the mad genius, wasn't he? He liked trying all sorts of things.
He did. Michael Buettner was a guy that had a great career, especially at Parramatta, and he played for the Northern Eagles and North Sydney Bears. So really good player at North Sydney. Came to the West Tigers. I thought he made some good contributions at times, but was right up the end of his career when he came to the Tigers. But played a few good games for us.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Braithen Asser signing, just 3-4 years sort of past their best. I'm trying to remember who made that signing. I think he joined in 2003, Buettner, so it might have been just before Tim Sheens, or it might have been one of Tim Sheens' first signings. I can't quite remember.
I would have to say
played in 2003 and 2004.
Yeah, I think he was a Terry Lamb signing, but
yeah, I mean, he had my main memories of Buettner. I think he was obviously played for Norths and was good with Jason Taylor, and then I think he came across to Parramatta in that great year they had in 2001.
Yeah, where they scored a stack of points in 2001, didn't they?
Yeah. So I think injuries. He was right at the end when he joined the Tigers.
Classy player. He was a good centre in his day too. This next guy, you might not remember him. He didn't play too many games. Benji Marshall.
Yeah, Benji Marshall. It's funny now. You're showing all these old games, Joel, and I don't know. I can enjoy him a bit more because at the time I loved Benji Marshall, obviously as a player, but you couldn't fully appreciate, I suppose, from my end, how much he changed the game and just how different he was because, that week to week you're trying to win games and so he did things that were so frustrating as well. But I think, if all my mates who are fans of other teams, one of their favourite players is still Benji Marshall because they just used to say we used to love turning on the TV on a Sunday and watching this guy play. And, we've spoken at length over the past 12 months about him and how he's come back. And, he'll go down as one of the most, iconic players in NRL history. He probably won't be an immortal, but I saw him ranked. I think they did one of the 1 to 10s, Joel. They've done about 1,000 of them in the last 2 months, but I think they ranked him the 3rd or 4th best NRL 5'8" of the NRL era.
Yeah.
And that was ahead of some big names. So I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. He is definitely a player. I'm watching that Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix at the moment. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's really interesting. So I didn't obviously know Michael Jordan's a really good basketball player, but just you get to know the things that maybe we as Australian fans or as not great basketball fans maybe not know too much about his career. But you could see with him, he was the sort of player that the fans from other teams would enjoy watching as much as their own players. And I think Benji Marshall, because Benji's not he's never been a divisive character. He's always been someone who's pretty much done the right thing on the field and not taking cheap shots or, he's got a good reputation off the field and people like him. And he's probably one of those few players that the home teams wouldn't hate him. I don't know why you'd hate him.
No, fair point. I mean, it's probably the opposite of someone like a a Paul Gallen or Robbie Farah, where very, prickly sort of guys who competitive but could get up the skin of anyone, sometimes their own fans. But, like you said, Benji was always the good guy and, a stack of highlights that will long live on.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Lawrence played quite a number of games at 5'8", really, when you think about it over the years. Often filling in, however, not permanently. I think he equated. There was a couple of games. I think one game that comes to mind, I think, was against the Cowboys at Leichhardt, where he had quite a good game at 5'8". But certainly the centre days with Chris Lawrence's highlight.
Yeah, I think, I could see at times what Tim Sheens was trying to do is if you have a controlling half, he sort of had that period where he was trying to turn Benji Marshall into that controlling half, and just have Chris Lawrence as a runner. And sometimes that can work, but Benji was still playing fairly erratically back then. And, I remember the last game of the year one year, Chris Lawrence, it was at Leichhardt Oval. Can't remember what year. We couldn't make the finals, but he was at 5'8", and he put in a kick about the halfway line. I reckon it ended up halfway up the hill. I think it was the worst kick I've ever seen. If anyone remembers that, that was the low light of Chris Lawrence at 5'8".
Speaking of low lights, Mitch Moses.
No. Well, look, he's a good player, Mitch Moses, but what do you expect Tigers fans to say? He didn't exactly leave on good terms. The
last game he played for us, he dogged it, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he did. I was at that game. It was against Cronulla. And, we're actually, where I stand is sort of just 2 or 3 in from where he defends, just sort of right on the rail there on the grandstand side. And, his body language was poor. And that's things that, one thing I hated about that whole time was the lack of, our captain, Aaron Woods, was sort of saying, oh, well, let Mitch do whatever he wants and wherever he's happy. And I thought, man, some of these hard guys back in a different era, they'd be telling him something different, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I always think about Belmore in the early 1990s, where a young centre who's now sadly passed away, he had done something, and a couple of the well-known tough Belmore forwards sorted him out. So there you go. So how things have changed. But look, I can't speak. I've got no hair. But if you watch with Mitch Moses, next time you're watching him play, every time he kicks the ball and there's a shot on him, he's like this with his hair. It drives me bananas. I don't know if anybody else has noticed it, but he does it every time.
It might just, I don't know if you're a cricket fan, Joel, it might just be one of those mannerisms that he doesn't mean. When Steve Smith touches everything before he faces the ball, but maybe it's just a vanity thing. I don't know, but he seems to be playing pretty well for Parramatta, but I still think he's a bit temperamental. I wouldn't say he's going to keep ascending. Who knows?
Braithen Astor played a few games at 5'8". I didn't have him on the list, but he's in the same sort of category as far as West Tigers fans are concerned, I think. I thought when he came across, I remember the first game he played was the trial out at Campbelltown. I think against the Roosters. He played quite well in the back row, in the second row. I thought we were going to get better from Braithen Astor, but he was not the player that we... Well, again, look, it's typical West Tigers, isn't it? We've signed the guy in the twilight of his career.
Yeah, and for the people that were watching the Roosters closely during that period, he was past his best for his last 3 or 4 years at the Roosters. I know they had a magic run and they went and made the finals, or the grand final that year. They beat us in Golden Point. But I tell you, Roosters fans the last 3 or 4 years, I got a few of them, they were not happy with Braithen Astor's lack of involvement, lack of running. And his best football for me was when he was at Canterbury. And that was sort of 04, 05, 06. I thought he actually mentored, without knowing, I thought actually Luke Brooks played some of his best football with Braith next to him.
Yeah.
So whether just that experience of having a guy knowing how to set yourself up, I thought that was some value. But in terms of his individual performances, I think he was a shot duck by the time he joined the Tigers.
Exactly. Fabian Capetta, talking about Tui Lola here, said, as people can see on the screen, he looked like he'd swallowed a sheep when he arrived. We spoke about Tui Lola here, talking about centres or 5 fullbacks the other week. But I think a guy, and if you watch him in the Super League, got plenty of skill. But boy, he's got that that brain fade in him. It's funny to watch.
Yeah, he had the skill. You could tell that. I think the first game he joined us, I think it might have been against, or the first time he started at 5'8". I think it was a game against the Dragons on a Saturday afternoon at ANZ. And, I just don't have a lot of time for sort of those signings, because I think the first thing, the things you can control is sort of your effort and your fitness levels. And, if your fitness levels aren't quite there at that ruthless NRL level, I don't know what you expect other than inconsistency. But yeah, he's got some freakish talent, but never going to sort of hit the heights, and that's why he's probably in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He on his day is an NRL standard player for sure. Just can't seem to get it together. And Josh Reynolds, of course, the last on the list there. I'm pretty sure that covers all the main 5'8s. It goes to show just how influential Mbye Marshall has been on the club and in that position at the Tigers. And after Mbye, it's sort of hard to say who your next best favourite player is there, isn't it?
Yeah, very hard. I mean, there's some names there that are big names, Nasta and Butner and that, but hard to really gorge many performances out of them at the Tigers. So I think it's Mbye and Mbye only for me, Joel.
Okay. And if we could fast forward 2021, it's going to be Adam Doueihi at 5'8",
Yeah, hard to know. I'll be very, very interested if this Nick Meaney signing comes off and him potentially at fullback. Adam Doueihi could be a centre or a 5'8". I'm going to have to hold a little bit on that, and they still might be keeping half an eye out on the market over the next 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, next time we come back, we'll be talking about West Tigers halfbacks, and that's going to be a good chat because that's been an interesting area for the club over the years. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll do the list and I'll put it up and get our followers on Facebook to have their say about their favourite West Tigers halfbacks and less not so favourite halfbacks over the years. And we'll talk about that next time. And we'll be just about time to play some football next time we do the podcast as well, Eddie.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's very exciting, Joel, because it's not a whole lot's been happening in the last couple of months, unless you love watching Netflix or reruns of old movies or 1990s games. But I don't know. I was excited when I saw that draw, Sharks and Titans to start with. Or should we be dreading it, Joel? Because for me, I think they're going to be two of the worst teams in the competition this year. Is that a bad time to get them, a good time, or who? No idea.
Well, they'll be fully fit, so that's not a good thing. But then so will the West Tigers. I noticed I was reading the story on NRL.com about the game, and down the bottom, the fans can tip what they think the result is. Tigers 1-12, Tigers 13+, etc. And most people were tipping us to win by a margin as well. So I don't know. Maybe there's just a lot of West Tigers fans that went in there and read that story, but. I'm feeling confident. I think we've struggled with the Sharks in recent years, but I think the tide's about to turn, and I think this is a really important game for West Tigers. I think if we can beat the Sharks, I think that that could sort of get us going get this season going, because we've got to put that Newcastle result and the big break in the game. We've got to put it behind us as quickly as possible, and a win against the Sharks, I think, would put us in good stead.
Yeah, well, some players compared it. Used to be a marathon the season. Now it's almost like a half marathon. So I think the Roosters in the first two games back have got South and Brisbane. So imagine the Roosters starting 0-4, and the Tigers starting 3-1. You've now got only 20 games to catch up rather than 24. So it's imperative that I think we win both these games out of the blocks, because there will be harder teams on the horizon.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Take it easy, Eddie. We'll come back again next week.
I'll come back and I'll have the lights on, Joel. This time I won't be glowing in the dark.
Hopefully you've got your new computer by then.
See you, mate.